In a relatively short period of time, social media has revolutionized the way we consume and share information, and it continues to evolve and morph before our very eyes. So how best to understand this massive force affecting almost every one of us? Joining us now to discuss their new book, The Social Organism, A Radical Understanding of Social Media to Transform Your Business and Life, are co-authors Oliver Luckett and Michael J. Casey. Oliver and Michael, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Tanya.
Oliver, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
At the core of your book is a comparison of social media to sort of a living, evolving being.
Yep.
Can you expand on this metaphor a little?
I mean, we've always used words like cellular and virus and things like that to describe it. And one time I was asked to draw the future of social media, and no drawing could explain it, or I couldn't comprehend something that was so complex. And I had this viewpoint in representing thousands of celebrities inside of these super spreaders, and I just started seeing all these patterns. And then we started talking about it, and then we took the metaphor of what it means to be living and the definition of it, and things like genes and others, and started applying it to social media and what worked and what didn't, and it really stuck. And so the book kind of evolved in its own, and so now here we are.
And just like humans' immune systems, it needs to develop immunities, and there are pathogens. And let's discuss that for a second, because you address in your book how social media has both the power for great good. It mobilized, I'm thinking of, Take It Down, mobilizing, getting rid of the Confederate flag in public spaces, and Je suis Paris, where the global community came around this terrible act. But we've also seen instances where we feel like we may be losing it to a culture of hate. Correct? Yeah. So they're
good and bad in both of them, right? And so if you look at those examples, both of those examples, the Confederate flag and the Paris massacre, those are moments of terribleness. Right. But we recognize those as bad. Right. When the massacre happened in Charleston, South Carolina, the church massacre that brought down the flag, that was kind of the one antigen that had an immune response. We suddenly saw the Confederate flag after 150 years of it being sold at Amazon and WAL-MART and other businesses. Suddenly that was not allowed anymore. Right. And so when we see examples of this hate you're talking about today kind of bubbling up, it's a great example of our social organism. Now, what does it do with it? Does it recognize it as hate? Does it act upon it? Diseases like HIV go undetected in the system, and they actually attack our immune system, and then they hide. And so traditional examples in immunology of just trying to eradicate the disease don't work. Right. The leading thoughts are, how do I train the body to actually elicit its own immune system to recognize this as a foreign thing. And training the body. And training the body, exactly. Is something that we need to do for social media. Michael, do you have some advice for Mark Zuckerberg? Because as you know, everyone's talking about fake news, and he says he's going to make a big push and try to get rid of it, but it's not so easy. Right.
So ironically, this is not necessary advice for Mark Zuckerberg, who may not want to go this far, because one of the major solutions to the problem he's facing is to open up the algorithm, right? It's a non-transparent algorithm that runs the metrics determining which posts get prominence and which don't, which feeds they go to, which echo chamber they land into. We don't know how that works, and that has hugely discriminatory impacts on all sorts of publishers, including serious news organizations who are now competing against fake news producers who are just paying a few $100s to get a boost inside an echo chamber. But that's a business model. That works for Facebook along these lines because they get to control the content, they get to manage the audience. So there's a very important consideration here for how we as a society want our platforms to look. We need them to be open. We need them to be able to evolve in the way that we're talking about our immune system, so that it's able to recognize these challenges and internally deal with them. There's all sorts of interesting ways in which we might be able to take an immunotherapy approach and build mechanisms into the platform that allow it to evolve in a healthy way.
Well, your book has a great example in what Riot Games did. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this is to do with this problem of hate speech, and I think it's very important to recognize that we don't think censorship is the way to go. Right. It is, like we say, it's like an antibiotic that creates a superbug, right? The thing to do is to allow us to expose ourselves to these problems, but at the same time, we can create democratic infrastructure like Riot Games did, where they asked everybody in the social network to define what they thought was hate speech, to come up with a voting record of what was good or bad speech, and then build mechanisms like automatic AI things that just give reminders to people saying, hey, this isn't actually a healthy way to speak. And Riot Games introduced that, and it actually reduced the amount of homophobic and other, racist comments phenomenally, because there's the sort of the culture of the organisation itself, the culture of the network, evolved to understand that this is actually just not cool. This is
so
not
the community is the policing force, not some big brother or thought.
Correct. I mean, but there are perils in all of it, right? And so one of the big points that we try to make out is transparency for one, which Michael was talking about, but also this kind of new form of etiquette, which is extraordinarily important in having empathy and understanding what the other person is saying. I mean, even in response to the fake news stories, I've seen now several Chrome extensions, overlays onto Facebook that are saying, if you're reading this post, then maybe you should also read this one for a counterbalance. Right. And so I think that, our body tries to achieve homeostasis, right? We cut ourselves, we have platelets, they react, they have a cascade, an enzymatic pathway. We need to develop that same type of taking in information, processing it, balancing it, because the result, this media network, these social media networks are all dependent upon us as human beings to spread an idea. There's no broadcast signal. Right?
So social media is here to stay, yay or no?
Correct.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So ignore at your own peril, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
But the story.
But we're all responsible.
But yes, but the story as to whether it will help us forward the cause of humanity or that's not yet been
It's up to us. We are the distribution network now. It's not TV towers and print runs or newsrooms. It's actually human brains. It's our synapses. The triggers come from that. And our emotional responses, we need to manage that.
It's a huge responsibility.
Yes, and evolution is not always progress.
Right.
So
we have a big responsibility.
That's a depressing thought.
But we have the power to direct it. Human beings have always had some control over evolutionary processes.
Right. And in terms of businesses, quickly, also ignore at your own peril, correct?
Yes. But also learn to feed it. Learn to nourish it with valuable things. I mean, if you see brands that have a value system that match people with those values and then provide interesting information, education, things like that, they win. Because people like transparency. They like a direct knowledge base to work from.
Oliver and Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tanya.
Great book, a very important read at this time. So thanks so much for that.